Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sedona International Film Festival. I'm your host Carol Kahn and we are coming to you live from the Sedona Rouge Hotel and Spa. Sedona Rouge is one of our sponsors along with Broadcast Rentals and Sedona Advertising Agency. We'd like to thank our sponsors for participating this year's festival. This year's festival is so exciting and I'd like to introduce you to Jesseca with an E and your film.
Oh, and then there's Anthony Palmer.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about the film, because first I want to say that Anthony actually selected the title of this. What did you want to name it?
So the film is about him and kind of, his experience being a side musician, being a guitarist, and some of his issues with the music industry. So I wanted to name it in his own words because it's so nice, I think, for him to have a platform to talk about some of these issues. And I showed him the film and he liked it, but he was like, I want to just name it something different. And so when I asked him what he wanted to name it, he came up with, and then there's Anthony Palmer, and I asked him why, and I think it has just a lot to do with sometimes when you're not a front man, you can be an afterthought, and he really thought that was more appropriate, and I thought that, one, I wanted him to feel like, he really had ownership of the film just as much as I did, and he didn't really want anything else changed, so I figured, why the heck not? I like the title too.
Well, how did you even meet Anthony?
Yeah, so originally I was making a film about West Side Chicago blues, and I was looking for musicians who were from the West Side, and as so do with many documentaries, the trajectory changes, and so I ended up making that film, but he was more interested in talking about other things. He had kind of lost connection to the West Side and was more interested about talking about his career as a side musician, and so I ended up making the other documentary. But I always came back to Anthony, and I was like, I always kept filming with him, even though I wasn't quite sure. But I originally was going to make a whole separate film, a different film about him. And as it does with documentary, things evolve. But, you just get to know someone by going to their shows, and dancing, and before you bring a camera in. And I think that really helped, us in our rapport.
As a filmmaker and looking for subjects to basically do a story about, is it sort of intuitive? Do you actually know when it's the right thing?
That's such a great question. I think that sometimes we, as documentary filmmakers, don't think of it in the same way as fiction does, where you literally cast an actor. But I think you also are casting your, the people in your films. To the extent to which you want to make sure that, they want to be in it, that they're passionate about it, that you guys are on the same kind of wavelength about what the film's goals are. And so even though it's not casting in a way that's traditional to maybe narrative fiction, I definitely think that because of who he is and what he wanted to talk about, that a lot of that does kind of dictate the story. And so sometimes I will have a predisposed or kind of an idea in my mind that I want to go out and pursue. And depending on who you talk to and the new ideas that get placed in your head, sometimes what you initially wanted to do doesn't end up actually happening. And so I think it's a mixture of both.
Right. Well, let's take a look at the clip and then we'll talk more about the film.
Okay.
I learned a couple of licks in the house. I said, okay, I'm ready. You imagine somebody, you got your hopes up here, right? I walked in the club, I'm like walking on a cloud. I'm ready. I hope this is for adult consumption. To paraphrase, motherfucker, you better go home and learn how to play. Now you imagine being 18 years old, hopes up here. It was just like, I can put my tie on when I have to, but this is who I am.
Yeah, he's amazing.
What is it that really intrigued you about him?
I feel like on a personal level, he can seem a little reserved. And as I spend more time with him and his wife, who's also in the film, I feel like he just started sharing more and more. And the thing that I love so much about him is that even though he appears to be really reserved, he really isn't. If you just ask the questions, he's very frank and very, will tell you how it is. And I think I just really respect that. He's not necessarily going around, talking. There's some things in the film, some problematic things that he mentions about the music industry, and you would never get the sense from him in his playing sometimes like that he's struggling with a lot of these issues, but he's also not trying to hide them either. And so I just really appreciated his raw honesty.
Now, did you actually do the interview? Did you interview him?
Yes.
So when you do interviews, there's definitely a connection that you have with someone. And a lot of times when the interview is in depth, as this one is, you have a takeaway that you almost learn a life lesson. So what was the life lesson that you learned from this?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. Well, I would say probably don't be afraid to ask tough questions or to maybe elaborate on things that, and not just with interviews, but I feel like as someone who's interviewing someone, you're juggling this, like, you want to get the content and the information, you want to tell your story, but you also want to connect with someone. And so sometimes asking questions that go a little bit deeper can sometimes be awkward if you haven't built up enough, rapport, or even if you have rapport, like, it can just be a difficult conversation. And I think continually working in documentary, I keep learning, and a lot of it also from Anthony is difficult conversations have to be made in order to really do justice to his story. And so, for an example, he talks about issues in the music industry, and I was really concerned about, if I ask him, like, well, who's doing what, and like who's doing all the wrong stuff, it may also impact his ability to get work. And so we did end up talking about it, and then some of it makes it into the film, but doing it in such a way where I feel good that I went there and that we talked about it, but also in a way that hopefully is not going to make it so it's harder for him to move forward in his career.
Mm-hmm. And was this kind of a step away from the typical genres that you usually work in?
Actually, yes. So I think for the most part, I do a lot of experimental documentaries. My starting point is always, for this particular story, what's the best format? And usually I'm a little bit more experimental. I love hybrid filmmaking. I love reenactments. I love, taking artistic liberties, if you will. And not in the sense of like deriving from fact or getting away from the fact, but just like playing with interpretation. And some stories are just clear and straightforward, and you don't need to do that. You can, let the subjects, or I hate the word subjects actually, the characters or their interviewees, you can just let them speak for themselves, and I don't need to project anything extra onto it. Mm-hmm. And so it is kind of a breakaway, because I don't normally do things as traditional as this. I made another blues film, which is how I initially got in contact with him, and that one is also very traditional, because you can't mess with something that's already great, and so since blues and this type of music is so I think traditional in a sense, and I just didn't really want to mess with that. And he's so articulate about the things that he's concerned about and with his life, that I think that he did it better than I could have done. So I thought that I would just respect that.
Well, it's a wonderful story. And Jesseca, where is it playing?
Oh, it's playing at the Harkins Theater tomorrow or Friday at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Yes. It precedes Tree Man, which is a wonderful feature as well about music.
Right. So this is great. Great combination
Exactly.
for that. And then is there a website or information where people can find out more?
Yes. So I have a website. All my work is on there, including, and then there's Anthony Palmer, and it's Jesseca with an E, Y Simmons.com. gmail.com.
Well, Jesseca with an E, Simmons, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And good luck with your film, too.
Thank you.
And if you're following us on social media, it's hashtag Sedona Film Fest 2020 and hashtag Sedona Film Fest 26. We'll be back with more filmmaker interviews after this.